At 28, I learned that some family wounds never fully heal. The favoritism my parents always showed toward my younger sister wasn't subtle at all. It was like having an extra character in our house, always present at meals, during celebrations, and especially in times of conflict. Jessica is 25 and has always been the family's golden child. Since we were little, her achievements were met with thunderous applause, while mine were greeted with polite smiles and a "that's great." Madison, my mom, Elizabeth, never tried to hide her preference. When Jessica won her first talent show in 4th grade, we got a special dinner. When I got accepted into college with a full scholarship, I got a quick hug and a "don't forget to thank your dad for covering the fees." My dad, Michael, tries to be neutral, but his neutrality is actually part of the problem. He sees what's going on and chooses not to step in. "Your mom is just different with each daughter," he says, as if that explains the pricier gifts, the more valuable opportunities, and the unconditional support that Jessica always received. I grew up believing I had to work harder, achieve more, be more, just to get a fraction of the attention my sister naturally got. Over time, I learned to settle for less expectations, less disappointment. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to access more stories like this. The invitation to Jessica's wedding arrived in a golden envelope. Brandon, her fiancé, seemed like a nice guy, maybe even too good for her. The ceremony was going to be grand, exactly what my mom always dreamed for her favorite daughter. Even with our complicated history, I was genuinely happy for my sister. I bought an expensive dress I could barely afford, helped with the preparations, and even put up with my mom's comments on how I should take Jessica as an example and get married soon. On the day of the rehearsal, I arrived early to help with the final touches. That's when I saw the seating chart for the reception. I squinted, thinking I must have misread it. I looked for my name again, scanning the floor plan of the main hall. "Looking for something?" a voice said behind me. It was Margaret, Brandon's mom. "My seat. I can't find it," I replied. She checked the list. "Madison, here it is. You'll be in the side corridor, table 15. I was stunned. The side corridor was practically another room, separated from the main hall by decorative columns. The tables there were for distant acquaintances, not so close work colleagues, not for the only sister of the bride. "There must be a mistake," I said with a trembling voice. "I'm afraid not." Jessica personally reviewed the seating arrangements. I found Jessica at the beauty salon, surrounded by her bridesmaids, trying on hairstyles for the big day. I waited until they finished the hair test and then asked to speak with her privately. "Jessica, I just saw the seating chart. I'm in the side corridor." She avoided my gaze, fixing a stray hair. "Oh yeah, we had to make some last-minute adjustments." "Adjustments? I'm your sister, the only sister you have. Madison, don't make a drama out of this. We had to accommodate Brandon's family in the main hall, and someone had to stay in the corridor. And that someone is me, while my gym buddies and work colleagues get seats in the main hall." At that moment, our mom entered the room. As always, she immediately took sides. "Madison, please, it's your sister's day. She's already stressed enough without you stirring up trouble." Stirring up trouble? I was literally kicked out of the reception at my own sister's wedding. My dad, who had just arrived to pick up my mom, tried to intervene. "Maybe we can sort this out." "Jessica, there's no way to rearrange." "There's nothing to rearrange," my mom interrupted. "The invitations have been sent out. The seats are set. Madison, you're being selfish, always craving attention on a day that isn't about you." I left the beauty salon feeling that familiar sense of injustice that had clung to me since childhood. In the car, the tears I had held back finally spilled out. It was always like this. I was the selfish one, the problematic one, while Jessica could do whatever she wanted with no consequences. Driving aimlessly, I recalled all the times I swallowed my hurts for the sake of the family. Jessica's birthday parties were always grand, while mine were intimate celebrations. The trips I had to cancel when Jessica needed something. The constant criticisms of my work, my looks, and my choices, while every decision of Jessica was met with applause. I stopped at a cafe and ordered some tea. As I idly scrolled through my phone, I opened our old conversation. That's when I saw the messages from months ago, when Jessica had vented to me about her future mother-in-law. "Margaret is unbearable," one read. "I can't wait to get rid of that old control freak after the wedding," another said. There were dozens of them, all complaining about Brandon's mom, the same woman who now held a place of honor in the main hall, while I was relegated to the corridor. At that moment, something inside me changed. Years of repressed anger crystallized into determination. If my own family didn't value me enough to give me a seat at the table, why should I keep protecting this perfectly curated image that everyone worked so hard to maintain? The wedding day arrived, bright and perfect, as if the universe was conspiring to give Jessica exactly what she always wanted. The ceremony was flawless. I smiled, snapped photos, and played my role as the proud sister. During the reception, I found my table in the side corridor just as expected. From there, I could barely see the main hall. I sat between a distant cousin who didn't even recognize me and one of Brandon's co-workers who spent the night glued to his phone. The MC announced it was time for speeches. Naturally, my name wasn't on the list. I watched as the best man, the bridesmaids, and even one of Brandon's uncles stood up to speak. When Margaret took the mic to give her moving speech about how Jessica was the daughter she never had, something snapped inside me. I stood up and walked determinedly toward the main hall. A few guests noticed, but most were too absorbed in Margaret's syrupy speech. I waited until she finished, polite applause filling the hall, and before the DJ could announce the next song, I grabbed the microphone. Good evening, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Madison, the bride's sister. I wasn't scheduled to speak tonight, just like I wasn't scheduled to sit in the main hall. A wave of murmurs swept through the room, but since Margaret just shared her love for my sister, I figured it was only fair to share what my sister really thinks about her. Jessica's eyes went wide with horror when I took out my phone and started reading. Margaret is the worst mother-in-law ever. If she says one more thing about my dress not being traditional enough, I'm going to lose it. This was in February, after the dress fitting. I looked straight at Margaret, whose face was starting to turn red. Oh, and there's more. Brandon's mom thinks she has a say in everything. I can't wait to get rid of that old control freak after the wedding. I'm going to limit her visits to once a year, if that much. The room fell deathly silent. At the main table, Jessica seemed frozen, while Brandon stared at her in disbelief. My mom stood up, but my dad gripped her wrist, his eyes fixed on me with a mix of shock and something resembling respect. Madison, stop this right now. My mom finally broke free and advanced in my direction, but I kept going. Margaret had the nerve to suggest we use her family's old rings, like I'd ever want to wear those outdated, ugly pieces. I said I loved the idea, but I've already ordered others. I paused to glance at Margaret, who now stared fixedly down at Jessica's hand, where a ring that certainly wasn't a family heirloom sparkled. A chair scraped loudly as someone was roughly pulled out. Margaret stood up, her whole body trembling. Jessica, is that true? Her voice was controlled but heavy with contained emotion. Jessica shot me a murderous look before turning to her mother-in-law with her best practiced smile. Margaret, Madison is taking everything out of context. You know how sisters sometimes vent about little frustrations. Little frustrations? Margaret repeated, her voice going up an octave. You called me a control freak and lied about my family's rings that have been in our family for 5 generations. Brandon finally snapped out of his shock, stepping between his mom and his fiancée. Jess, did you really say those things? Before Jessica could answer, I continued. Brandon has no idea, but I've already planned for us to live at least 2 states away from his parents after the wedding. I'll use my job as an excuse, but honestly, I just want distance from that suffocating family. Brandon's eyes filled with hurt. 2 states away? But we just talked about buying that house 20 minutes from my parents. Jessica abruptly stood up, knocking over a champagne glass. That's ridiculous. Madison is making all this up because she's jealous. She's always been jealous of me. I shook my head slowly, feeling strangely calm. I can show the messages to anyone who wants to see them. I've got them all saved, with dates, including that one from 3 weeks ago where you said Margaret's planned reception was plain and tasteless, but that you'd fake liking it just so you wouldn't have to pay for something better. Margaret advanced toward Jessica, her face contorted in fury. I poured my heart and soul into this reception. I spent half of my savings so you could have the wedding of your dreams. Mom, please, let's talk about this in private. Brandon tried to calm her down, but it was too late. In private? How were you 2 planning to move away in private? How did she disrespect our family traditions in private? Margaret's voice echoed through the hall, each word louder than the last. Meanwhile, my mom finally reached me, wrenching, the microphone from my hand with such force it caused a shrill noise from the speakers. "This is completely unacceptable, Madison. How dare you ruin your sister's wedding?" Her eyes sparkled with rage as she advanced, pointing her finger at my face. "You've always been a troublemaker, always seeking attention, but now you've crossed every line." "Troublemaker?" I gave a bitter laugh. "Is that how you justify years of favoritism? Labeling me as the problem so you don't have to admit you always treated your daughters unequally?" My dad finally intervened, stepping between us. "Elizabeth, that's enough. Let's try to calm this down." "Calm down?" My mom looked incredulous. "Your daughter just destroyed her sister's wedding and you want to calm things down?" On the other side of the hall, chaos spread like wildfire. Brandon and Jessica were engaged in a heated debate, with him gesturing at his mom, who was now openly crying while being comforted by relatives. Some guests began to stand up, uncomfortable, while others, especially Jessica, and Brandon's mutual friends, tried to mediate the situation. "I can't believe you'd do something so cruel." Jessica finally managed to break free from Brandon and advanced toward me, her eyes blazing with fury. "You've always hated me, always wanted what I had. And what exactly did I want, Jessica? To be treated like the golden child? To have a place at the wedding of my own sister? To be treated with a little bit of regard by my family? It's always been all about you," Jessica shouted, completely ignoring my arguments. "Always wanting to be the center of attention. Not even at my wedding could you let the day be mine." That's when Brandon's father, who had been silent until now, stood up. "I think I've seen enough. Brandon, we're leaving. You can stay or come with us, but your mom and I aren't sticking around to be insulted." Brandon looked at Jessica, his face a mask of disappointment. "How could you say those things about my family? About my mom? I didn't mean it like that. It was just venting. Everybody complains about their mother-in-law." Jessica tried to grab his hand, but he pulled away. "No, not everyone secretly plans to cut their partner off from his family. Not everyone lies about something as significant as family rings." While the situation was falling apart around me, I felt a strange calm wash over me. Years of pent-up frustration had finally found an outlet. It wasn't about revenge, it was about relief, as if a massive weight had been lifted off my shoulders. My mom kept berating me, her voice now mixing in with the general chaos. My dad was torn between calming her down and trying to help Jessica, who alternated between yelling at me and begging Brandon to understand. Some guests began leaving discreetly, while others were visibly entertained by the unfolding spectacle. I saw Margaret being escorted out by her husband and 2 of her children, her face stained with tears and smeared makeup. Brandon looked at Jessica one last time before saying, "I need some time to think. I'm going with my parents." He turned and headed toward his family, ignoring Jessica's desperate pleas. "See what you've done?" my mom yelled, turning her attention back to me. "You ruined your sister's wedding. How are you going to fix this?" I looked at her, with a calm I'd never felt before facing her anger. "I'm not going to fix anything, Mom. I didn't write those messages about Margaret. I wasn't the one who put my only sister in the corridor. I wasn't the one who favored one daughter over the other for almost 3 decades. How dare you talk to me like that, after everything we've done for you? Everything." "Exactly? Every time you prioritized Jessica's wishes over mine? Every time my voice was silenced so as not to ruin her moment? Or maybe you mean the endless comparisons, constantly showing me how I wasn't enough." My dad finally intervened, his tone softer than I expected. "Madison, maybe we should all calm down and talk about this tomorrow." "There's nothing to talk about tomorrow that can't be said today, Dad. But you're right about one thing. I'm leaving." I walked over to the gifts table, where my envelope with a check still lay. I grabbed it, tore it up in front of everyone, and stuffed the pieces into my bag. "What are you doing?" Jessica asked, momentarily distracted from her own personal tragedy. "I'm taking my gift back. Consider it a symbol of the relationship we're ending here today." Jessica advanced toward me, but was held back by one of her bridesmaids. "You can't do that. You ruined everything, and now you're taking the gift?" "I can, and I am. This is probably the first time I've put my own needs above yours, Jessica. How does that feel?" I slung my bag over my shoulder and took one last look around. The hall, which just hours ago had shined with flawless decorations and festive smiles, was now in complete disarray. Tables were overturned, chairs scattered, guests either confused or leaving. The perfection that meant so much to my sister had shattered completely. "I hope you all have a good night," I said, without a trace of irony in my voice. And then I calmly walked toward the exit, passing by the side corridor where my designated seat remained empty. In the 48 hours after the wedding disaster, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Text messages, missed calls, emails, everybody from my immediate family. I didn't respond to any of them. On the third day, my apartment doorbell rang. It was my dad, alone, looking haggard with dark circles and slumped shoulders. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice tired. I hesitated for a moment before letting him in. He sat on the couch, rubbing his face with his hands. "Things are complicated. Jessica came back home. Brandon isn't answering her calls. Margaret apparently told everyone on the groom's side about the comments. The wedding is, well, no one even knows if there's still a wedding. I'm sorry it's come to this," I said. And it was true. I never meant to destroy Jessica's relationship. I just wanted her to feel a fraction of the pain she'd been carrying for years. "Your mom is devastated. She's blaming you. Entirely. Of course she is." I couldn't hide the sarcasm. "And you, Dad? Are you blaming me too?" He paused, taking a long moment to choose his words. "I blame all of us, in a way, including myself. I saw what was happening for years and didn't do enough to fix it." His words caught me off guard. It was the first time either of my parents indirectly acknowledged the unequal treatment. "Jessica is furious with you," he continued. "She says you destroyed her life out of pure jealousy. And what about the things she wrote? About Margaret? About lying to Brandon? About planning to cut him off from his family? Is she taking responsibility for any of that?" My dad looked away. "She says they were just things said in the heat of the moment, that she didn't really mean to do any of that. How convenient. Madison, did you really have to do this at the reception? Couldn't you have confronted your sister privately? How do you think I found out about my seat in the corridor, Dad? I confronted her privately. I confronted the whole family. And, as always, I was ignored, dismissed, and treated like my feelings didn't matter." He fell silent for a long while. "Your mom wants you to apologize, to call Margaret and explain that Jessica didn't mean those things." I let out a bitter laugh. "Of course she does. It was always about protecting Jessica from the consequences of her own actions." "Madison, I'm not going to do that, Dad. Jessica wrote those messages. Jessica decided to put me in the corridor. Jessica lied to her fiancé and her family. If she wants to save her wedding, it's up to her to fix it." He nodded slowly, as if he'd expected this answer. "I understand. I just want you to know that, despite everything, you're still our daughter. And we hope that, with time, we can mend what's been broken." "Maybe we can," I replied sincerely. "But it won't be with empty apologies or pretending. Nothing happened. It'll have to come with real changes in how this family operates." Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to access more stories like this. 3 months passed since the wedding day. Autumn arrived, turning the leaves. Red and gold, a fitting metaphor for the transformation our family was undergoing. Jessica and Brandon finally started talking again after weeks of silence. From what I heard from my dad, they're in couples therapy, trying to rebuild lost trust. Their marriage is officially in limbo, neither together nor apart, stuck in a state of uncertainty. Margaret demanded a formal apology from Jessica before speaking to her again. After much reluctance and several attempts to pin some blame on me, Jessica finally gave in and apologized to her mother-in-law. According to my dad, it was a painful process that involved many tears and accusations from both sides. The relationship between them remains tense, but at least they're talking again. As for my mom, she moved from anger to silent resentment. We've spoken briefly on the phone a few times, but our interactions are superficial and cautious. She still can't admit her role in all this, preferring to see herself as the victim of my impulsive actions. In her version of the story, I simply exploded for no apparent reason, driven solely by jealousy and resentment. My dad has been the bridge between us. He visits me regularly, often bringing homemade food as a pretext to check on me. In our conversations, I sense that he's slowly recognizing the problematic patterns in our family dynamic. There aren't grand declarations or dramatic pleas for forgiveness. It's small comments here and there, careful questions, and a newfound willingness to listen to my perspective without immediately defending my mom or Jessica. As for me, I found a strange peace after the storm, The therapist I started seeing after the incident helped me understand that my reaction, although extreme, was the result of years of repressed emotions and violated boundaries. I'm not proud of the way I exposed Jessica, but I don't regret finally standing up for myself. I still haven't spoken directly with my sister. She sent me a long message a few weeks ago, a confusing mix of accusations, justifications, and veiled requests for reconciliation. I replied that I needed time and space to process everything, and that we'd get in touch when we were both ready for an honest conversation. I discovered that setting clear boundaries with my family gave me a sense of power I'd never felt before. It's not about revenge or punishment. It's about self-determination. For the first time, I'm not letting their desires, expectations, or judgments determine my actions or my self-worth. Last week, I found a card from Jessica among my mail. Inside was an old photo of the two of us, probably taken when we were 8 and 5, building a sandcastle at the beach. We were smiling, arms linked, untainted by the complicated dynamics that would eventually drive us apart. Along with the photo was a simple note. Remember when it used to be easy? I placed the photo on my shelf and realized that despite everything, I still love my sister. I still love my parents. Love was never our problem. It was the inequality, the injustice disguised as normalcy, the distorted expectations that grew around us like suffocating vines. I don't know what the future holds for our family. Maybe we can rebuild something new from the rubble of the old, a relationship that's more balanced, honest, and healthy. Or maybe we'll have to accept that some wounds run too deep to ever fully heal. What I do know for sure is that I'll never settle for scraps of affection or a seat in the sidelines again. I deserve a seat at the main table of my own life, and I finally found the courage to take it. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to access more stories like this.